thank you for taking time out this evening to join me for this first of 7 reflections on the 7 last words of Christ on the cross. I realize today's Palm Sunday. Here's what should have happened. We should have all been in church together. The music should have been uplifting, upbeat, and energetic. The palms should have been handed out at the front door and waved during the first hymn. Children should have participated in the dance, and we should have left anticipating gathering again for the greatest Sunday of all, Easter. But that's not what happened today. Today we find ourselves in our homes against the backdrop of a dark and threatening virus. So I may just choose to look at this week a little differently than I have in the past, focus a little more on the darkness of the days preceding that glorious first resurrection morning, and consider more deeply the 7 last words of Christ during the darkest hours the earth has ever experienced. The first word comes to us today from Luke chapter 23 and verse 34, where Jesus cries out, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." Jesus was being mocked, laughed at, ridiculed, blasphemed, spit upon, unjustly accused. And while all that was going on, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." Before we go any further, it's important to remember that these cries from the cross had a prophetic nature to them. They were spoken of in the pages of the Old Testament, the writings of the Psalms and the writings of the prophets. This phrase in particular from Isaiah 53 verse 12. The one speaking here clearly is Jesus. The one he's speaking to is his Father. If you look at the 7 last words of Christ, you notice that a number of them are spoken directly to God the Father. The request is to forgive somebody. Well, he's asking God to forgive those that are perpetrating these horrific acts upon him. And it's the reason that he asks the Father to forgive them that I find intriguing this evening. They don't know what they're doing. Now, when I was young and I read this text and didn't understand the nature of sin and forgiveness and righteousness and justice, I almost thought that Jesus was just saying, "Hey, no problem." Have you ever said that to someone? You ever been in the supermarket where someone in front of you and the 12 items or less line has 13? They don't realize it until they start putting their items out, and then they do, and they notice that you've noticed, and they look back at you and say, "I am so sorry." And if they only have 13 or 14, my typical response is, "No problem." That was a popular phrase when Tammy and I honeymooned in Jamaica over 30 years ago. You could hear the Jamaicans saying all the time, "No problem, man." In fact, you could even get that on a t-shirt at just about every kiosk along the beach. It sounded like that to me. Jesus was saying it's no problem. They don't know what they're doing. But that is not the tone here. No problem is not the same as forgiveness. In fact, forgiveness only occurs when there is a problem, when there is a sin, and there is a wrong that must be forgiven. So what did Jesus mean by this when he said, "Father, forgive them, for they don't know what they're doing"? Again, it had to be deeper than a no problem. What was he saying? They were too immature to understand the wrong they were doing. I remember once being at a church event, and the home that we were at, they had a couple of kittens, little tiny cats. And another family came, a mom and dad and their 3-year-old daughter. And before the afternoon was over, Mom caught her 3-year-old daughter pulling the tail of one of the kittens. And Mom got a little frantic and began to raise her voice at her daughter. And then her husband, dad of this 3-year-old, came over. And he kind of nudged his wife and he said, "Go easy on her. She doesn't know what she's doing." In other words, she's too immature to understand that tugging on that little kitten's tail could hurt. That's not the tone of this either. That's not what Jesus is saying, that those that are harming him are too immature to know what they're doing. What did he mean when they said that they didn't know what they were doing? "Father, forgive them. They know not what they do." What they didn't know was that their wrong, this is what they didn't know, that their wrong was going to ultimately be redeemed to accomplish the greatest good ever given to man from God, the rescuing of men from eternal hell. It is in that sense that they didn't know what they were doing. The very wrong they were doing was going to be forgiven by the only one, could only be forgiven by the one that they were doing the wrong to, and of course his Father. So that the ones who were doing the wrong could be rescued from their own wrong and someday be proclaimed righteous in the eyes of God. We know that one of the Roman soldiers at the foot of the cross on that day of that crucifixion came to a realization that the one on the cross was indeed the Son of God. I want to make two very brief applications as we wrap up this thought on the first of the 7 last words of Christ. Again, imagine in your mind this horrific scene. The sky has grown dark. The mob has grown ugly. The blood is running freely. Jesus hangs upon the cross, silent. But then his pain-lined lips seem to move. Is he about to cry out in pain? No. Is he about to ask for pity? No. Is he about to pronounce a curse upon those who are crucifying him? No. Is he about to call, as one hymn writer said, 10,000 angels to remove him from the cross and set him free? No. What then does he say? He's praying. He's praying for his enemies. Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing. Now think about this. The great servant king is now upon the cross. No longer can his hands minister to the sick, for they're nailed to the tree. No longer can his feet carry him on errands of service and love, for they're fastened to the wood. No longer can he instruct his disciples, for they've forsaken him and fled. But there's one thing he can do, and he does. He prays. Application number 1. We're all trapped in the house. And those of us that are doers, we're fidgety. We're looking for something to do. We're looking for someone to help. We're looking for something to fix. But we can't. But what we can do is pray. And my encouragement to you is to increase your prayer life. To use that time, to find yourself during more of the minutes of the day than you ever have, on your knees before God, interceding for the lost, for the lonely, for the sick, and the afraid. The Bible calls that work in Acts chapter 6 and 7 when the first deacons were chosen. They were chosen so that the elders could give themselves fully to the work of the word and prayer. And so number 1, it is never too dark to pray. And certainly this time is no exception. The second lesson that I pick up from this quickly is no one is beyond the reach of your prayer. No one is beyond the reach of your prayer. You may think you have friends, family, relatives, neighbors, coworkers, fellow students who are way too far gone for God's grace to ever rescue. No one is ever beyond the reach of prayer. And Jesus proves that by asking his Father to forgive those that are mocking him and blaspheming the great name of God. I trust that today you will find yourself giving a little more time to prayer. And you'll ask the Lord to put names on your hearts of people who desperately need you. Not your works of service today, not your financial resources, not your great advice, but just need your prayer. And that today you would imitate the great servant king, the great Lamb of God who takes away the sins of the world. And on behalf of maybe the worst of the worst, you'll find the same mercy in your heart that Christ had when he cried out, Father, forgive them, for they don't know